everybody. It's Meg Carpenter, and I am very happy to be back with my friend Mark Bruno, who is the managing director, oversees all of wealth management at Informa. Mark and I did a similar YouTube interview a few months ago. I think that was that in May, Mark? I think
right before Edge. That's right.
Yes, yes. And the topic that we tackled in that video was, are events really worth it? We wanted to be able to provide value to the industry coming into a heavy event season, which typically is Q2 into Q3. And so we wanted to sort of provide value to businesses in this industry who really view events as a great opportunity to build your brand, make connections with the right type of people that you want to make connections with, and ultimately drive business growth. And we had really great feedback from that conversation. And we also left the conversation feeling like there was more to talk about. So this is essentially a part two of our event really worth it conversation. And Mark and I have a few things that we want to dig into, which hopefully will be helpful to everyone listening as you're looking ahead to end of year, but also planning for 2024. So thanks, Mark, so much for being game to do this with me again.
Thank you for having me back. I appreciate it. I think the first episode was a lot of fun and clearly hit some of the right notes, right, with your audience, your community. So I think part two is very appropriate, especially given the full lineup of events that are coming up any minute now.
There's a lot. Yes, exactly. I know we're both gearing up for it. So one of the things, like, I got a bunch of text messages and DMs around, like, can you please ask Mark, because Mark, you're like one of the, I think, leaders Informa is in hosting really valuable events for the industry. And you do a lot throughout the year. You can tell us a little bit more about some of the events you have coming up. But because you do this so often, you have such an amazing team. People wanted me to ask, like, what's the deal with events being on the weekends? And so if you think about it from the perspective of salespeople who have to sometimes arrive on a Saturday for a Sunday start to get everything set up. If you think about parents who are trying not just to find coverage during the work week, but now also on the weekends. And from my perspective as an employer, I always do, like, it's heavy on my heart when I ask one of my teammates to travel on the weekends, because, like, that's really supposed to be their time. So what is, like, why do events start on the weekends? It feels like more and more events are starting on the weekends. So can you just help us break it down from your perspective as, like, how timing comes into play?
I like the way you asked the question. It's the way I ask it too every time I have to travel to an event on the weekend.
Right.
Why am I traveling? There's a good reason for it, though. I will say, I think when we're doing events that start on a Sunday, for example, usually a Sunday afternoon, we'll do some workshops and then we'll have a keynote that kicks off. It's usually when we're doing something that is more of a destination type of event, right? So if we're doing Chicago, day and a half, you could very easily start, Monday afternoon, go all day on Tuesday, and then people can go wherever they want to after the event, and that's that. But if we were doing an event like Edge, which did start on a Sunday, right? We want to make sure that if people wanted to come down, and I know a lot of our attendees, a lot of our speakers, they brought their families, right?
Mm-hmm.
They actually made a weekend and an experience out of it. And we know that people are being much more selective, right, in the events that they attend. And I think one of the things we've learned over the last couple of years, sort of post-COVID, is it's not necessarily about work-life balance as much, so much as it's work-life integration at times, right? So I actually look at it as, if I have the opportunity, right, to integrate a long weekend with a work experience, like, why wouldn't I take that, right? Now, I know it doesn't work for everybody all the time, right? But that is a part of it, right? There's no question. And when we're doing an event like Edge in May, which took place in Hollywood, Florida, at a beautiful resort right on the beach, that tends to be something that people look at, and yes, they have to leave on a weekend, but if they can bring their family and create an experience, create a moment out of it, they seem to be embracing that. And, it took me personally a while to take advantage of that. It's a major privilege, right, to be able to say, guys, do you want to come to Florida? I took my kids to Orlando when they were 3 years old, right, for the TD Ameritrade conference. And we hit Disney World, the whole week, magic hours from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m, whatever it was, TD conference all day long, and then went back for magic hours. And then I was exhausted and actually needed a month off after it, right?
Exactly.
It was one of those experiences where, I don't know that I've ever actually been more productive, right, than I was at that time, because I knew when I was there, I had to really just dive right in and get it all done. So, I mean, sometimes it works really well, right? And other times there are people that look at it as a deterrent. They won't travel at all. We know that we can't, please everybody all the time, right? But when we're thinking about our events, we're not just thinking about a conference, right? We really are thinking about an experience. So hopefully that is something that is appropriately additive.
I think you deserve an award for taking twin girls to Disneyland when they were 3 while also at a work conference, because to me that sounds absolutely nuts.
And it was.
And it was. I'm kind of.
It was the right move. It was the right move.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point. I've thought about that a lot. I haven't been able to pull it off yet with my 3 kids. But if you can, it is a privilege to your point, and I think that totally adds to the experience. Is there anything that around costs, like our weekend business events cheaper because most businesses want to do something during the week?
No. And often they can be more expensive, right? Because you're paying whatever unionized labor
Oh,
for
right. Yeah.
overtime, right? So it is something that when you make that decision, right, there has to be some real upside to it. So it's not an easy call, right? Sometimes you're also just forced to live with certain dates, right? Depending, and this is still, even though we're well out of COVID, the scheduling is still hung over, if you will, right?
Mm-hmm.
So many dates moved around. There are not as many dates available as you might like. So sometimes you have to make concessions. But truthfully, I look at it as something that if you're really trying to build an experience, right? And while it doesn't work for everyone, some people can travel in on a Monday morning, right? For the people that were there this past year, right? Edge to kick off on Sunday, that opening reception after our keynotes was the highlight of the event for me. The energy there was unbelievable, and it was a perfect way to kick off Edge. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We find that it works way more often than it doesn't.
Yeah, that's good to know. I think part of this may be like you may remember that I took a red eye into Edge, and like I always tell myself, you're too old for red eyes. You cannot survive on red eyes anymore. But as a parent to young children, I'm just trying to do it, like squeeze it all in. I love your point around integration versus balance. I often try to think about like presence versus balance, because I think we've all acknowledged like balance doesn't exist, right? So I like thinking about work-life integration, work-life presence, whatever it is. And it seems to, and we talked about this on our part 1 of our events conversation. It does feel like, because there are so many events, that conference organizers really are trying to put together the puzzle piece in just the right place that they think is going to yield them like the highest attendance with the right types of people and the most interest from speakers. And I know, because you and I are both looking ahead to the end of the 3rd quarter, we're in 2023, and there's an event that we just got an invitation to that is on the Thursday and Friday before Labor Day weekend. And I'm thinking to myself, like, gosh, that's going to be tough. But I'm sure that they had to do it to secure the location that they wanted. It happens to be the beautiful location in Deer Valley, and to just get the space from the sponsors, from the speakers. Like it's limited. And so I think, you and I talked about this last time, but there is something to be said around the conversation that we started around, are there too many events in the industry? And I think one of the outcomes of there being so many events is what we're feeling. You've got events that start on weekends. You've got events that butt up to holidays. You've got events that overlap, and people can't be in 2 places at once. And so it is interesting to me to think about what that means for our industry and how that may or may not impact the future of events.
Yeah, I think I'm very curious to see what 2024 looks like on the event circuit. I think there was this obvious balance after COVID where events came back in a big way, right? We saw there were more sponsors than ever, there were more attendees than ever, and 2022, fortunately, was as good as it can get, right? In many ways, obviously, events can grow and be more individually successful, but there was a lot of pent up demand, not just from people to get out and sponsor events, but just physically to see people, right? One of the things that we saw this year that was really interesting, right? Some of these user conferences, which we talked about on the last podcast, have really evolved and become industry conferences, right? And I don't know how that plays out. My guess is that there will be fewer of those moving forward, just because there's a lot of competition for the same people, right? Mm-hmm. And they end up being more vendor conferences than advisor conferences, right? So if you truly want to be in front of financial advisors or interacting with other financial advisors, peers, While there are more conferences, that doesn't mean that there are more appropriate conferences for you, right? It just means there are more event organizers, right?
Right.
And more things for you to choose from. So, I mean, for me, I look at the end of this year is very busy, right? No question. And while the sort of pent up demand may have died down a little bit, and one of the things that I noticed at Edge that I think we'll see a little bit more of in the second half, because there are still a lot of RIA firms and wealth management firms that are hybrid, right? So they may be in 2 or 3 days a week. They may have actually hired in different regions or different parts of the country. They're using potentially events as offsites, right? And we're trying to help facilitate that. We're trying to say to the leaders of larger RIA firms, listen, if you have people that are everywhere, why go out and organize your own offsite? Like, we'll use our event as that platform, right? You don't have to bring the whole firm, but if you want to bring your leadership team, you can. And we actually, with RIA Edge West, which is coming up at the end of September, brand new event, it's really just for decision makers in the RIA space, right? We will get into all things, practice management, human capital, comp, succession planning, M&A, you got it, right? But we're saying, listen, if you're a large RIA and you have a CIO, a CTO, a CEO, a COO, all the C's, right? Bring the C-suite. And it's not something that every large RIA will do, but more and more of these firms, if the content is right, if the community is right, are really looking at these as very strategic opportunities to bring their teams together. So we'll see how that translates into next year, but that's one of the bigger developments that I've seen as people get more selective. Is it the right launch pad, right? Is it the right platform for them to bring their core team together?
Yeah, I mean, you just gave so much insight there. I think that's a good recommendation. We try to do that here at Ficomm when we're looking at our event attendance, is think, where can we all go together and have like a pre-conference leadership meeting or extended leadership team meeting, or bring everyone together and then allow more people on our team to experience an event so that it's not always just, a handful of us that are showing up. So I think that's a really great recommendation. And I think to your earlier point too, around user conferences, I'm curious, like I'll be interested to watch that next year, and you and I can come back together next summer and see if our predictions were right or wrong. But I think there's limited availability for people to be everywhere at once. And so curious to see how that shapes the overall sort of landscape of events. One thing that I did really appreciate seeing this year is smaller events pop up that are hyper focused for the type of advisor that they're looking to speak to, and not trying to get, all of the same sponsors or all of the same speakers, and just staying like really grounded in like, this is the content, we're targeting a specific type of advisor. We're not trying to blow it up. Some may say they're trying to fly under the radar, but it's intentional, right? Like they're not looking for the same splash as others. I think Shift was one that we participated in for the first time this year that was like hyper focused on a specific type of advisor that are talking much more about the behavior of finance, and really like that. It was super hyper focused around that. You and I always go to Echelon Deals and Deal Makers, which is hyper focused on the M&A landscape, as are the DeVoe conferences, which are really well attended. And so I've appreciated seeing those. I've attended some custodial conferences this year that are small and intentionally small. And it's like a very specific subset of their clients, the custodial clients, that they're bringing together to talk about the exact topics. And those events are really nice. And I think actually from a speaker's perspective, we're always looking for brand awareness. You're also just looking for opportunities to grow. And I found that those smaller events can be really powerful growth tools, because you can oftentimes get in front of audiences that don't know you, because those advisors aren't going to all of the bigger industry events. So it'll be interesting to see how it all unfolds.
Yeah, I think the smaller niche events are definitely serving a purpose, right? And in a lot of cases, the niches, while they're a niche in the raw number of attendees, the assets and the influence, right, that those niche audiences may control, they're not niche at all, right?
Right.
I mean, that's what we're doing with RIA Edge, and I've seen you at some of the other custodian conferences, right, that are smaller but have larger firms there. I think, to me, I just look at it as very simple. Like, wealth management is a community, right? Then there are communities within the community, right? You can't be all things to all people. So as an event organizer, we pick the communities that are, I use the term premium communities all the time internally, right? The ones where we know them in and out, right? And we know what gets them out of bed in the morning, what keeps them awake at night. And we think about different ways that we can solve for it, right? So, I mean, if that's the kind of thing as somebody who's listening to this is thinking about where they want to go, the large events absolutely serve a purpose. There's no question. It's a way to just parachute legitimately into your ecosystem, right? That's
Right.
what Management Edge is. But if you want to be a little bit more targeted, you know, an event like you mentioned, Echelon Deals and Deal Makers or Edge West, right? If you're thinking about understanding not just how to value your business, but who else is out there right now, right? That is asking very similar questions. I may be a potential buyer, first or second time buyer, and I may sit next to you and you could be in the same position as a first or second time buyer. We may not actually do business together, right? I might not buy your firm, you might not buy mine, but I can ask you questions about your experience, what you're thinking about. And that goes back to, you know, really what the root of this industry is. Like if you think about the independent channel, all of the study groups that people were doing, all of the peer-to-peer learning and sharing, I've always felt like one of the things that I love about this industry is the best of the best aren't competing, right? They're very altruistic. They're sharing, right? There is a willingness, right, to say, here's where I failed, here's where I succeeded. Let's compare notes, right? So if you're able to find conferences that have that same effect, right, but at a larger scale, maybe introduce you to people you've never met before, but have seen on a podcast, seen quoted in other articles, maybe you've seen them speak. I think you want to be selective, but those smaller niche, you know, events, just because they're smaller doesn't mean that they're, you know, less impactful. In many cases, they can be some of the most impactful events out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's change gears a little bit. I think one of the most powerful set of tools that you shared during our first conversation around events was really how to approach the ROI of events. And you gave everyone sort of, I thought, this really great structure by which to approach how do you show up at an event, which is think about the funnel. Are you focused on top of funnel awareness? Then you want to show up in a certain way. Are you focused on middle of the funnel? Then you said, well, maybe that's where you need to get people to a booth to do a demo because that's very middle of the funnel. Is it bottom of the funnel? Do you use the opportunity while a lot of people are at an event to actually have one-on-one meetings where you can close a new client or whatever it may be? So I thought that that was really insightful and people have taken away a lot from that. And I think another lesson that you imparted, which was really, really wise, was to think about how people create content at events that can be leveraged like far, far, far beyond and after an event ends. And so I'd love to get your take on Edge, which was earlier, was in June, right? May, June. And how you actually saw that play out, like any successes that you want to share or any observations that you had from Edge.
Yeah. And I think for me personally, that is the first question that any company that's thinking about, you know, sponsoring or attending an event should really be asking is, what can I do, right, with this event experience before, during, and after, right? It's, let's just say you're a sponsor, right? And part of your package is you get a speaking spot. That tends to get 90% of the emphasis, right? We spend time prepping and putting presentations together, doing all these calls in advance to make sure that everybody is aligned. And it's important, right? But it's just one piece of the experience, right? I really look at Edge and some of the best conferences out there as platforms, amplification platforms, right? We had a podcast booth. We had one last year as well, but we took a different approach this year where we just had like an open sign up thing, no app, right, that you had to go into and figure out how to sign up for it. Literally just a dry erase board with times that were handwritten in. And it was right by our leading edge stage where we had, you know, obviously you and others, you know, do some presentations. By hour one, the end of hour one, the whole thing was taken.
Oh, wow.
There wasn't a minute left to spare, right? And when you really think about, you know, we had 1,500 people there, how many podcasters, how many influencers, you have the ability to get with people that you've never met before but admired, right? You get to turn sort of social into real life, right? And you get to create content out of it, right? So, you know, there were people that, you know, man that podcast booth 24/7, not literally, but and you know, that was just, you know, one part of their experience. They were on a stage, they were in the podcast booth, and then they leveraged it on social during and after, right? And I think the smartest people were also the ones that, you know, they kind of used the time, you know, independently. And what I mean by that is it's not hard to, you know, bring your own, you know, camera. It's not hard to use your own iPhone to shoot videos. And there were some people who shot such high quality videos of their experience, day one, day two, day three. I felt like they actually hired like a documentary crew, right, to follow them around, right? So when I looked at sort of the net impact of, you know, the Edge, it wasn't just what we created in the exhibit hall or on the main stages, right? It really was a foundation, right? You know, the event itself is just sort of ground zero for how do you tell your story, right? There were some people who just said, listen, this is a great opportunity for me to say, I'm here, right? I'm participating in Wealth Management Edge, right? One of the most important events in our space. Here's what I'm learning. Here's what I'm experiencing. So it's, you know, August today, and I still see videos on LinkedIn, you know, that people are just trickling out. And it's not about the event, right? The event just sort of adds to the credibility and the energy that surrounds the content. But the people who got the best ROI, right, weren't the people that necessarily spent hours on a main stage, right? They were the people who are getting hours and hours and hundreds and maybe even thousands of views associated with their videos, their blog posts, and everything else on their social platforms and their own websites too. So to me, that's the first question you have to ask is, how do I leverage this? And are they enabling me, right? Whether it's a podcast booth, a video studio, whatever the case may be. Is the event organizer really thinking about how can I help you leverage this and merchandise this, right? I hate the word, but it just makes sense, right? How do I help you merchandise your time, right? So that you're leaving with your significant suite of content assets.
I think that it's such a good point. And I think I love what you said about it doesn't have to be highly produced, right? Like you can shoot on your iPhone. You also don't have to be on stage, to your point. Like I think that there's a lot of value in if you are attending a session and you love what you're hearing, or maybe you have a counter opinion, or maybe you think that there's something that the panelists left out. What a great opportunity to create content from the event, whether you shoot a video of whomever is on stage, or you record a video of yourself afterwards saying, you know, I just listened to so-and-so speak on stage. This is what they were talking about. This is what I liked. This is what I want to learn more about. What a great way to create content that engages far beyond and like creates that community that we know events can be so powerful for. And we do that as well at Ficomm. So I think we still have video from Edge 2022, where we were on the leading edge stage with Michael Kitsis. That's still like those clips are still coming out. And we were at leading edge. We're on the leading edge stage this year, 2023, with Angie Herbers, and we're still in post-production on that. And so like that's going to be coming out. We'll use that for the next year, all because we showed up at Edge with good content and the opportunity to speak. Like we will be using that for years.
Can I tell you, I mean, for me, that is great to hear. It's also something that, yeah, it was implied and it sounds so obvious to me, but I think it's worth being explicit. Right? I think about, you know, your participation, not just at Edge, but also at, you know, Pershing's Elite Conference, and you use the actual stage to record a podcast, right? I did the same thing with RA Edge. I just launched an episode with Tom Bradley, another one with Liz Nesvold after the fact. And they were just the audio recordings of the Q&A or the fireside chats that I did there. I did it with the mindset that I was going to turn it into a podcast, right? But if you have the ability to really think about how do you fully use the court, right? Like how do you double down? Used to live by a rule of 3, where like anytime you create one piece of content, you need 3 different ways to distribute it, right? Try and do that. We're creating a lot of content, so it gets a little bit harder at times. But that's just another way, right? Obviously, if you do have a speaking spot, if there's an opportunity, Caleb Silver from Investopedia showed up with his own rig and said, can you plug this in? Because I want to take this Q&A that I'm doing and I want to feed it into my podcast, right? So I would encourage everyone to do that if they have a podcast or if that's something that they're comfortable doing.
Yeah. And of course, like all of this goes without saying, that has to be, it has to be centered on like why you do what you do, who you do it for, like that marketing framework that we always talk to. So don't show up at an event and create content just for the sake of creating content.
Yeah.
But you can, and you should absolutely show up at an event, go to the sessions that are aligned with what you offer, who you offer it for, the types of things that you're speaking about, like get really clear and focused. There's so much amazing content at these events that you just have to be mindful about sort of your strategy going into it. Why are you doing it? Who are you doing it for? What are you looking to get out of it? And then just hustle and make it happen. And it's so content rich and like educational and community minded that the opportunities are, to your point, like go far beyond what can exist as a speaker or as a sponsor. So one thing that we can cover this really quickly before we'll talk last about budgets for next year. But one thing that I did get after our part one on this, and then I wrote an article called How to Become an Indispensable Speaker. And I used all of the insights that you shared around, have something interesting to say and like show up with a compelling platform. I did get some questions from people saying, I feel like I've got that. Like, I feel like I have something compelling. I believe in it. I've worked on it. I feel like it's differentiated, but I just don't know how to get in front of conference organizers. Do I try to get their email and send them an email? Do I try to get a personal introduction? Do I send them a message on, I can't even say Twitter with a straight face anymore, X or LinkedIn or whatever. Yeah. But like, as a conference organizer, there's someone that you don't know, and they feel as though they would add a lot of value to your conference. Like, let's just say RIA Edge West, which is coming up at the end of September. What's the best way for you? And I know it's personal to you. Every conference organizer will be different, but like, how do you like to hear about new unfound speakers?
So there are a lot of different ways that we try and find speakers. I mean, I should say we have a team, right? We have people who not only are doing dedicated research, right, to figure out who our next best speaker should be, but we have the wealthmanagement.com team, right? That's constantly interviewing people as sources on podcasts. So, we're really trying to use every part of our business to say, who are the most interesting people, right? And a lot of times, with RIA Edge, like, I have obviously my own podcast. I can look at the metrics to see what performs well and what might translate best, right? So we're trying to use more data to inform some of that. That being said, if somebody wanted to pitch a speaker, for one, they could obviously reach out to me, right? It's not a question of like who the right person to reach out to is. It's really a question of how compelling is the pitch, right? And we get a lot of pitches, right? And you can tell immediately if it's the same pitch that went to 15 or 16 different places.
Right.
So my first piece of advice would be, don't worry about just getting the megaphone and trying to blast as many people with an invitation to meet with and talk to your thought leader, right? I think pick your spots. If you know that RIA Edge is the right audience, right, and that's where you want to be personally, or if you represent somebody, that's where you want your people to be. Craft a very specific pitch that says, I've looked at your agenda and I think there might be an opportunity on this M&A panel to introduce fill in the blank, who, while behind the scenes, right, is one of the more experienced and more knowledgeable investment bankers, consultants. And here's a track record, that sort of demonstrates what his or her body of work was, right? The second I see something that says, dear Mark, as opposed to dear Mark.Bruno, right? I know that, it's more compelling to sort of review what the full pitch is, right? If the pitch is really thoughtful, here's who it is, here's what they deliver, and here's why it makes sense for your event, not just why it makes sense for me, right? Then it is that much more compelling. And truthfully, I would welcome people to reach out, because it's so easy to go to 15, 20 conferences, right, in a given year, and 60 to 80% of the speakers are the same.
I know.
Right. That is not why I'm in this business. Like, a big part of my role and my responsibility is to find people who have something different to say, find people who are emerging and up and coming and want to educate and inform from a slightly different perspective. Right. So it's a big part of our job. It would be easy to fill out our agenda in 4 hours with speakers if we really wanted to, but that would be lazy, right? We want to do the work. We want to hear from people, but it has to be a really compelling, clear pitch as to why this individual, or why you can add a unique sort of set of values to the event that no one else can.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's such great advice for PR teams everywhere, right? Because that's not just for events, but it's also for working with the media. You have to be really thoughtful and do your research and do your homework and make sure that you're making the right pitch that's actually going to add value to whomever you're pitching. And I would just add on top of that, if you're a speaker and you want to get on more conference agendas, do all the things that Mark is telling you to do, and also make sure that your public profile backs that up. So if Mark gets your email pitch and it's really compelling and you're hitting on the right notes and you're potentially filling a gap that Mark's been looking to fill on his agenda, and what you're going to do, I would assume, Mark, is you're going to do a little bit of research. So your social media profiles, the content that you create, what you're saying on the website, it all has to back it up, because it's very easy to see like, this isn't real. like this person's coming to me with an idea that they haven't ever spoken about before. They're not publishing any content on any of their online channels. Like they've never written about this before. And so that would be what I would add on top of it is it's got to be authentic. It has to be meaningful for whomever you're pitching. It has to be meaningful for the audience who's going to be at the event. And it has to be authentic to like who you are as a thought leader, an influencer, a speaker, an executive, so that all of those things can come together. And if you can do that, you will be successful. You and I, Mark, were talking a little bit before we hit record. Like 8 years ago, I would go anywhere that I was invited. I would pay my own way. I never back then charged a speaking fee or asked for reimbursement. If somebody invited me, I would go because I knew that I needed to build a profile. I was an unknown quantity when I started this business. And so I had to build a public profile. And so that's what I did. And I stayed on message and I did the same thing and I went everywhere and I flew. And over time, you meet people at these events, they see you, they talk about you, they present you to another conference organizer. And so I think that's also like a point to make. It doesn't necessarily need to happen overnight, but like put in the work and you'll get to where you want to go.
Yeah. And as a separate, maybe follow up or part 3, we should talk about if everyone should be paid to speak at events. That's another sort of third rail, right? And I can see both sides of it. But I do really think that the right events provide a platform and a level of credibility that say, listen, there are 270,000 financial advisors out there, but we only have 50 on this agenda, right? So this real estate is premium real estate. And if we reach out and invite you to speak, right, it is a privilege in many ways, right?
Absolutely.
If you feel like you need to be paid, let's talk, right? I'm certainly open to that. But I think that is maybe a part 3 that if we're trying to talk about the things that people really talk about when they're not in front of a camera.
Let's do it. Yeah, because I have a lot of thoughts on that because there's so many components to that decision on both sides, right? So like I come to it from the perspective of like business owner, my time is valuable, like all of those things, right? My content is valuable. And you're a speaker as well. So like you have that same perspective and you also have the perspective of the organizer. So maybe we just manifested a part 3. I feel like
all of those things can be true at once, by the way.
All of those things can be true at the same time. But I want to wrap us up by talking about what you're seeing from a budgets perspective, just as we're coming into the end of the year and then looking ahead to 2024 planning. A lot of the work that we do with our clients that we serve is everything we do is driving towards growth. So what do you need to be doing in your business to drive towards your growth goals and objectives? And for those businesses that have a B2B orientation in this industry, a lot of it is your event strategy. And so how do we help our clients to maximize their event strategy so that they can get the highest yield and achieve whatever the results are that they're looking to achieve, which can vary greatly. And so we are having conversations with clients around budgets and do I need to spend my full budget this year? Are there other opportunities for me to potentially pull back from some events and reallocate that budget elsewhere to meet my growth goals? And so we are seeing some shifts happening, nothing dramatic, but just hey, I was planning on going to this. This was part of our event strategy, but we're actually going to back off from it. And maybe now I'm just going to attend. I'm not going to sponsor and we're going to reallocate that money elsewhere. Curious if you're seeing any sort of, or having any conversations around budget pullback or budget reallocation, specifically as it relates to event sponsorship.
So I can't say that there have been major changes if we're just looking at the total dollar amount, right? What I'd like to sort of offer up is maybe a suggestion, right? I see the way I talk about our business is we're not an events or media company, right? We're an audience and a content business. Like that is who we are, right? The Informal Wealth Management Group. And if more of our clients thought that way, I think we might actually be able to put together more thoughtful, integrated solutions that have a clear ROI associated with them, right? So what does that mean in English, right? People who are not in media, events, research, or publishing. When we're talking about event sponsorships, we tend to be talking to someone who's on the event sponsorship team who never actually talks to the media, branding, or advertising team, right? Or the content solutions team, or right, anybody who might be in sales and distribution, right? So I know, especially at the largest companies, that's not easy, right? But if we weren't just thinking about, or should events sponsorship budgets be going up or down, right? Should they be getting larger or smaller? If we were thinking about audience, right, and who is the audience that we're trying to be in front of, and then we looked at the aggregate sort of spend, right, or investment that we want to make in not only being in front of that audience, but engaging them, right? You know, at the top of the funnel and also in the middle and the bottom when you have those one-to-one opportunities. So, you know, that those are the kinds of conversations that I'm having more and more of with our 10, 20 largest, clients.
Mm-hmm.
I would welcome more of those, right? And you don't have to necessarily be one of the 5 largest asset managers in the world to think that way, right? You can be sort of a mid-tier wealth tech company and say, you know what, this is where we are. This is where we want to go. What is the best strategy, right, for us over the course of 2024 to position ourselves so that we're part of the conversation, we're getting consideration, and then we're ultimately, able to meet with prospects and qualified leads who should be customers of ours, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, it's a different way to answer the question, but it's, to me, the only way to think about it, right, is strategically. If we're trying to be in front of a certain audience, an event may not even be part of the strategy in some cases, right? So what is the best holistic way, right, to market, brand, and obviously get in front of the right prospect? So that's it's less specific to the column of the spreadsheet, right? And really more just about the integration of all the different marketing budgets that you can draw from.
Well, I think that's really, I'm totally aligned with that. I mean, you always need to bring a strategic mindset and a holistic view to anything that you're doing in your business. It's more important today than it's ever been. And I think that's just a beautiful demonstration of the evolution of our industry, that we are at a point now where you, Mark, are running an audience and content business that has such great impact, and you're open to those types of conversations with businesses who also want to have an impact. And then it's really just about having a transparent, honest conversation around, what are your intentions? What are my intentions? We're headed in the same direction. We can help each other out. So how can we do that? It feels like it's less transactional and much more relationship and growth based, which is why this industry is so wonderful and we all love it so much. And so why not approach your marketing conversations from the same perspective? So I think that is the most wonderful way that we can wrap up part 2, with the tease that now we already know what we're going to be talking about in part 3. But Mark, I can't thank you enough for continuing to join me and to share your insights. I know that I'm going to see you at a few events coming up, including the Wealthies, which are the first full week of September in New York, which is just such a fun community building, I think, community celebration that Informa puts on. I'm going to see you before that at Deals and Deal Makers. So excited to see you on the road, but thank you so much for sharing your insights with me and with all of our viewers.
Thank you, Meg, for having me. I appreciate it. Part 2 is more fun than part 1, and I can only imagine what part 3 will bring.
Yes, and for everyone who's watching, thank you for being here. You're probably watching this on YouTube or on one of our social channels. Mark and I both welcome you to reach out to us at any point. You can reach out to us via email. You can reach out to us on LinkedIn. If you'd like to continue the conversation, we are totally up for that. So we hope that you will let us know what you learned, questions that you have, or things that you'd like us to cover next time. Thanks, everybody.